Hi, and welcome to Sessions and Tasks, Page Background Task. Hi, I'm Eric, and I thought I would start a little mini-series on all the different types of tasks and sessions and the whole concept of multi-threading in Business Central, which is a fairly new concept for people who have lived in the Navision, the Dynamics Nav world. It has always been kind of a single-threaded model. There may be multiple things going on, but it has always been, in a single thread. You would never have code that would run simultaneously, unless you have multiple sessions, or back in the old days when we fired up multiple NASs to run something. But in Business Central, we have several new concepts. Some of them came in Nav already, where we can actually execute code simultaneously. And I thought I would do a series of videos on this, and I would start with one of the new ones, the page background task. And what is that about? Actually, it's probably easier to show you. Here is a Business Central. If you have good eyes, you can probably see that this is a cloud tenant. And in this tenant, I have installed the one of our own apps, the eFocus SharePoint connector. And if I go into a customer, so look above here. See, there's the SharePoint box, and then there's nothing, and then we got some data. And let me switch to another customer card. There's nothing, and while there's nothing, the page is working, and then at some point we got data. So this is running via a page background task. And you can see if I go back to the first one, we have the same thing. The page is there, it's responsive, but there's nothing in the SharePoint box. It's thinking, and it's working. And then we get the data. So what goes on here? Well, in this case, there is a web service call going off to SharePoint to figure out, give me all the files that are in the folder that's associated with this customer. So when I switch to another customer, there's another web service call fired off to get all the files that are associated with that customer. If that were done in the same thread that is doing the UI, then everything will be blocked until that one is done, because the web service call will basically take up the single thread we have. But now this is spun out to a background thread that is doing all the work, and then it's giving us an event back, a trigger, saying, hey, I'm done, here's the result. So let me show you how this is done. And by the way, actually, let me first go in and say, just so nobody think, wow, that SharePoint connector is slow. It was actually so fast, it was really hard to see the effects. So just before the video, I added a 5 seconds sleep statement in here, just to make it go slow. So I'm gonna remove that again. So you guys don't get the wrong impression of the SharePoint connector. Anyway, so let me show you. Here is where's my mouse? It's right there. Here's a random page that has the connector enabled, and we are on the after get current record. And as you can see down here, there's a line that says cure page dot enqueue background. Oh, let me see if I can get that. There. Enqueue background task. Enqueue. It's very, very sophisticated language here. So what does that do? Let's look at it. The first parameter is a task ID, so we can identify the task afterwards. So that's just an integer that the ID of the task is put into. The next parameter is a code unit. So in this case, I call it factbox background task. Not very clever, but that's what it's doing. And some parameters, and the parameters is a dictionary of text. And then it says 30,000, so let's see what that is. That is a timeout. And the last parameter is a page background task error level. So let's see what options we have in that. We have error, warning, and ignore. So what happens on the page if there is an error in the background task? Well, we can have an error happen on the page, we can ignore it, or we can do a warning. And what is a warning? Warning is basically a notification saying, hey, something happened in the background task. We're not stopping the page from working, but something happened in the background task. So let's, instead of the So let's do this. So instead of the where I had the sleep 5,000, let's put an error. So now we're actually having an error in the background task. I'm going to deploy to the cloud sandbox. This will take a second or two, maybe only one. While that is deploying, we can just take a quick look. Again, there is awesome documentation on these things, and this is also the case of page background tasks. I will leave the link to this page in the description, but there's a great chart here of what goes on. So we are in the main thread on our page. In this case, we were on the on after get current record. So we're going to call the enqueue, oops, no, it's done, enqueue background task method. And that will, oh, and you see now we actually have a debugger error, something happened. This is going too fast. Actually, just quit the debugger here. So in this case, you can see here, we got a warning. Something happened, a notification of, let me make that bigger. And I actually also put it in the box, but that we can see how I did that in a minute. So if I go to the next page, boom, we get the notification because we set the error level to warning. That something happened in the background. I'm catching that anyway and putting it into the box here. But let's go back to this guy. So that's what's controlled by that parameter. So let's look at the parameters to the parameter called parameters, just to make it really complicated, which was a dictionary. So you pass in a dictionary, and basically you can think of the dictionary here as it's a key value thing. So in this case, there's only one thing I need to tell the code unit, is that I have a parameter I call folder, and that grabs figure out what the folder is and prepare all that, and I pass that folder into the code unit. So let's go back in the code unit and just remove our error here for a second and see what goes on in this code unit. So this is just a code unit, trigger on run. And we can see that, and this is where it gets strange, perhaps, that in the code unit we can call page.getBackgroundParameters. This will give us the dictionary that was passed in. And you can also see in this chart that we have the task parameters and they are transferred over here, so we can get them in the get background parameters method. But it's kind of weird that we're in a code unit and we're calling page dot. But hey, that's the way it is. So what I have done in my app is that I have separated the process of populating the fact box with files. I've separated that into the web service thing and then populating. And the reason for that is that, and this is weird, but so when we're in this thread, the background thread, we do not have a write transaction available. So the database is read only here. We can get records, no problem. We cannot write anything to the database. That in that case, you need to be clever. You need to figure out what is your time-consuming activity, and in this case, it's the web service calling out to a SharePoint, getting 10,000 lines of something, or what happens. So I had a function, get folder content. I split it into two. So this one is called get folder content step 1. And basically that one returns, in this case, it's actually JSON. So it returns JSON, and then the processing of the JSON into a temporary table, in this case, to fill out the fact box, is done back at the main thread. I'll show you in a second. So in this case, we'll just get the JSON, and then we have another dictionary of text called result that we're then adding the JSON to as of the keys just called data, and then we call page.set background task result with the result dictionary. Let's save this before. So when the background task has finished, so you can see it in the diagram here, that when the background task has finished, it goes back to call a trigger on the main page. Two things happens. One is that is rec the same as when the task was initiated. This is very important, and the page background task is designed for, as usual with Microsoft, that they start by designing the tools they need to cover their own functionality, and the two cases that are really well supported are populating fact boxes on card pages and populating cue cards and stuff like that, again on a page where, and if you check out if you saw last week's video on the page type, you would know that there were card and document and list plus. That were kind of the card types. That's where this will work, where the collection browsing list pages, I tried to get this to work, and it didn't work because rec is always changing. Anyway, so it checks that we're still on the same record for the result to be valid. Then we look whether this is if the task is successful or not successful. And in that case, it figures out what trigger to call. And you can see here that I have two triggers on this page: on page background task completed and on page background task error. So in case of our something happened error, you can see that I actually have a function here in my fact boxes. So okay, let's use the arrow and fill that into the box so you can see it, but it will also show as the warning. If it's completed, then I'll take the result and call a function I call finish fill, which take the results dictionary, grabs the data parameter, and then calls my get folder content step 2. So my original function I had that was sliced into 2 functions, now we're calling the second function with the data, and we're passing rec, because now we're in the fact box thing, so we're passing rec to populate the correct temporary table instance. Let's see. So to repeat, not to make this video too long, to repeat, you enqueue go away. There we go. You enqueue the background task with the enqueue background task function. Call the code unit, pass parameters into that one. The code unit runs and does its thing. You're in read-only mode, and then you pass the result back. You get an event, a trigger, and then you can do the rest of it. And as you saw at the beginning when I had the 5-second pause, the page is completely responsive even though the background task is running. So this works tremendously well in cases like this. The only challenge is the read-only scenario where in case you actually need to do something, you have to do it in the main thread. You cannot do it in the task. I want to mention before we end the video that here is a bunch of important things. Read-only operations, we covered that. Runs on the same instance as the parent session, as parameters are passed. Calls open company, executes its own in its own transaction. Yeah, but in a read-only transaction. Of course, you cannot do any UI stuff. That's fair because you're in the background. If the calling page or session closes or the current record is changed, the background task is cancelled. Cancelled means that it will never return anything. When it will stop executing is a whole other discussion. There's a timeout. We talked about that. Doesn't insert session event records. It relies on the parent session event records. So it's a child session of the parent session, but it's still isolated. And we'll cover this in another video. But there's a limit on the number of background tasks per session. So you can end up in the situation that if you fire off tons of different background tasks, you may have to wait until there's a free spot for your task to run. So there's no guarantee that it will run in the minute you call it. Hence the very colorful way of calling it enqueue, that you're putting this into the queue and hope it will get executed. And well, not counted as part of the license calculation. Yeah, that's the normal thing with a child session task. Let me see. I think that's it. So I thought it would be more interesting to actually show a real life example of how this could work than just programming a sort of a fake example. So this is how I use the page background tasks in SharePoint Connector, and this is an important part of making the let me actually, well, this one I'll just deploy again here. So while I talk, I'll just deploy. You can't see that because you're looking at me right now. But it's an important part of keeping an app like the SharePoint connector fast and responsive, and not just because it's on every page that it doesn't really slow down the page itself. It keeps being responsive. It keeps being having this. It feels the same whether the SharePoint box is there or not, which I think is a very important thing when you're doing something like this, because you don't want to add seconds, even hundreds of milliseconds to a page if you can avoid it. And this is one way of doing it. And well, now it is deployed, so let's just go back for a second here just to show you the actual speed of it, because you can see now. Let's make it so you can see the box. I switch to the next record. We get the data almost at the same time as the rest of it, but it's asynchronous again. Anyway, just want to show that's the normal. So it's not like it's making anything slower. It's just making it not blocking while it's doing stuff. So that's it for this this video. More videos will come on sessions and tasks. If there's one you want me to do next, let me know in the comments below. Remember to subscribe, and then until next time, have a wonderful day.